This is cartoonist Jeff Martin, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to a special edition of the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you have a comment, criticism, or question, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. These podcasts are dedicated to the exhibitors who would have participated at the Edmonton Expo. Edmonton Expo is an annual convention that celebrates the fun of pop culture, including comic book artists, writers, and creators from Canada and the United States. On this episode, I chat with Jeff Martin. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. Jeff is an award-winning cartoonist from Edmonton, Alberta. He's a creator of Hockeypocalypse, Where is Zog, Redcoats Ish, and his webcomic Hell Inc. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Jeff Martin.
So, Jeff Martin, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thanks for having me, John.
I appreciate your time. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic books. I wonder if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
So, I can't remember the first comic book that I read, because I know I read a lot as a little kid. There used to be a comic book store next to my doctor's office. So those became like a linked thing. The first comic that I remember reading multiple issues of and actually kind of collecting a series was a mini-series based on the Monster in My Pocket toys. This would have been maybe like 1990? Somewhere in there, like somewhere around there.
Oh, okay.
That's the first series that I remember actually, following and waiting for the next issues to come out to see what happened next.
Cool. Based on a toy, then.
Yeah, they were these little, inch-tall rubber monsters that came in blind buy boxes.
Good stuff. So I'm wondering, that's definitely an inspiration, but I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create your art?
I've had a lot of different creators whose work I thought was really cool and inspired me to do my own stuff. A lot of it has just come from, I've always enjoyed writing when I was in school, and drawing has always been something that I really enjoyed as a hobby. And then when I got back into reading comics in high school, the two first things I read were the trade paperback collection of Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon's Punisher run for Marvel Knights, and the first Hellboy trade. Yeah, when I got back in, that was kind of the idea that comics didn't have to just be superheroes, because the Ennis Punisher, they were just crime stories, and Hellboy was it's his own dark fantasy, kind of historical fiction, horror comic, and seeing that kind of stuff was being published made me realize I'm not interested in drawing superheroes, but there's stuff that I am interested in drawing that is being published now. And so I think probably the most consistent source of inspiration over the course of my career has been Garth Ennis's writing, particularly when he's given boundaries to not just be really gross. But when the stuff that I like the most is his war comics and his the Marvel Knights Punisher stuff.
Right.
And then Mike Mignola, particularly his art, but just kind of the whole world that he's created, where he got to do something that was sort of entirely his own creation and have it become a huge hit. And I've always found that really inspiring. Aside from Mignola's art being really inspiring because it's so cool and moody and weird.
It's definitely distinctive, that's for sure, whether he's doing Hellboy or he's doing Batman or Starman or whatever, but definitely distinctive for sure.
The only reason I started inking my comics when I was in high school is because I wanted to try and make them look like his. And I learned how to ink by just aping his style very poorly.
Well, it was good inspiration, that's for sure. Want to congratulate you on the Sequential Magazine Award as runner-up for favorite cartoonist for Hockeypocalypse. So,
oh, thank you.
That is a great name. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the inspiration for that story.
So the inspiration for that story is the Edmonton Oilers have been garbage for
Oh.
about almost 15 years now.
Oh.
So I got really into their 2006 Stanley Cup final run.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next 10 years, they proceeded to be the worst team in the league. And about halfway through that, I decided, you know what, I still really like hockey. I want to engage with hockey, but if I keep doing it by watching these Oilers games, I'm going to have an aneurysm or get an ulcer or something.
Oh, no.
I'm going to make my own hockey, and there's going to be mutants and stuff, because I like drawing monsters and
right.
and weird creatures. Hockeypocalypse came from the Edmonton Oilers being garbage for like a decade and a half. And so I got really into... Like, I'd always been like a casual hockey fan, but I got really into the 2006 run to the Stanley Cup Finals. The next few years, they were the worst team in the league. And so instead of, continuing to beat myself up watching them be terrible, I decided I was going to make my own hockey, where I control everything that happens. And also there was going to be mutants, because that's just more fun than drawing people. There's definitely some inspiration from the old Genesis game, Mutant League Hockey, which I knew existed but had never played until, I think like after the second or third book came out. I ended up finding a copy on like a buy and sell group online for pretty cheap. And so I ended up playing Mutant League Hockey for the first time after I'd already been doing a comic about mutant hockey for 3 or 4 years.
That's pretty cool. What did it live up to your expectations, or?
It did. It aged shockingly well for a game from like 93 or 94.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Good stuff. I'm talking to you and others under the context of the Edmonton Expo, which unfortunately didn't happen this year. So I'm wondering, what were you planning to exhibit at that particular show?
So the new stuff for that show would have been, I think the main thing would have been the collections of my Hell Inc. webcomic. The first 2 books in that series came out on Kickstarter last year and would have been making their Edmonton debut at this year's show. And then I'm sure I would have done some new prints or something. And I also would have had, for the first time in Edmonton, the new Gwar comic, The Enormogantic Fail, which I did a bunch of the art for.
For people not familiar with Hell Inc. and Gwar, can you talk a bit about each of those, what they're all about?
All right, I'll start with Gwar. They are a heavy metal band that dresses like space monsters. They've been one of my favorite bands since I was in high school, and I was lucky enough to be able to do a backup on their first book, Orgasmageddon,
nice.
That they did on Kickstarter a few years ago, just off of pretty much a cold email to the writer, telling him that I was, a big fan of the band, and I had done a comic for heavy metal on their website that was inspired by a Gwar song.
Nice.
And so the writer, Matt Miner, he really liked the comic that I sent him and said, he'd try and find something for me to do, whether that be a cover or some interiors. And about 8 months later, it came time to produce issue 4, and I got an email from Matt asking if I was free to draw a 2-page backup story. And then that turned into a bigger role on the second book, where I drew the chapter about the drummer Jizmak Dagusha.
Neat.
Hell Inc. is a comic that I have been doing as a webcomic since I think 2017 or 18. I think 18. And it is about demons who work in the office that runs hell. So they are, it's an office comedy, sort of like The Office meets Dante's Inferno.
Oh no. Isn't that true to life though? Pretty much.
Yeah, it's despite being a comic where everyone has like horns and tails and a lot of stuff is on fire, it tends to be the most relatable thing I've ever drawn.
Sure. Now, are both of these books available now?
Those the Guar book and the first two Hellink books are both available. You can get those from my website, which is hell.rentathugcomics.com. That's where I post the Hellink strips, and there is a buy stuff link that has access to all of the books that I've got for sale right now.
Good stuff. Now, before we started recording, you mentioned you had been to Edmonton Expo in the past for many years. So I'm wondering if you can recall any favorite moments that you can share with us.
Yeah, I've been to every year of Edmonton Expo. It's my hometown show, so it's the easiest show I do every year as far as convention logistics. It's hard to pinpoint favorite moments because I've done a lot of stuff at that show. I've been on many panels. A highlight every year for me is I started doing a panel with some of my friends called Hulks and Hogans about the connections between comics and wrestling.
Oh, okay, yeah, right.
And that has become one of my favorite things to do every year. We get like a decent sized crowd, and it's a lot of the same people just coming to watch us talk about dumb wrestling stuff, which is always a good time. Also, like I've always had great times at the creator after parties that Happy Harbor Comics would host. I've got to meet a lot of really cool people at those events.
No, that's good stuff. It's always a good opportunity to meet up with folks, for sure. That's what they're all about. I want to switch gears slightly and talk about your creative process. Can you walk me through how you go from the initial concept to the finished page? How does that work for you?
So generally when I come up with an idea for a comic, it's got kind of a broad, high concept, and then I figure out what is the emotional story to tell with that concept. So like Hellink is essentially, I've always hated the idea of having an office job. And so it was easy to think of like an office as hell. Like it's a pretty straightforward jump from A to B there. And then it comes down to when I have an idea for a series, then I start just drawing characters. And I don't necessarily know what those characters are gonna be or who they are yet. But I kind of just want to start exploring what might this thing look like if I work on it. And then as I'm doing that, I'm also thinking, what is this story about? Who are these characters I'm drawing? And what's the emotional story I want to tell? And like, what kind of emotions do I want to be drawing from the reader with this story? And that starts turning into, if I decide I like the series and I come up with a story that I think is engaging and can connect with people, then I'll start writing outlines. And that goes from it starts with just like a one sentence, like this is what the series is about, kind of what I mentioned earlier, like it's The Office meets Dante's Inferno.
Mm-hmm.
And then it'll go from that into being kind of a very broad outline of what is the entire plot going to be. So like introduce a main character, what is it they want, what do they need to overcome to get that, and what happens at the end, and then further breaking that down into however many books I want the series to be, and just going deeper and deeper until I'm at the point where I'm writing individual pages. And depending on the project, that can be anywhere from a few weeks to like a couple of years. Some projects I'll have an idea and I'll kind of just sit on it for a while because something's not right with the story and I have other stuff to work on, so I don't force it. I just kind of let it come to me, and if I figure it out, then I'll move forward.
Yeah, marinate a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Then once I've got scripts ready, it becomes a much more structured process. And it goes to, I print off the script, and I'll start doing page layouts right on the script. So a lot of times when I draw thumbnails, it can be interpreted semi-literally. They're really small and pretty rough, and a lot of the time they are not too much bigger than my actual thumbnail. And then because all I really care about there is, what shots do I want to include? Where am I going to leave room for text? Who's in what shot? And I don't worry too much about, quality of drawing, because I'm the only one who has to be able to read it.
Right.
And from there, then I go to penciling and inking, which will happen on paper. And then coloring and lettering, which I do digitally now. Although, like for Hockeypocalypse, for example, I still letter that series by hand. So that'll get done in the inking stage.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of, like Hell Ink, a lot of my more recent stuff has been done in Illustrator.
Okay, cool. Now, I noticed because Hell Ink is more of a web comic, your average is about 4 panels. Do you find that a limitation in trying to tell your story, or do you find that's something that actually helps guide you along the way?
It can be. Sometimes I will write out a strip and then realize when I take a second and look back at it that it's way too long. The dialogue exchange might be funny, but there's too much happening, or whatever action is happening is going to take up too much space. And at that point, I either break it into multiple strips, or if I've already kind of got my pacing for the issue, if that's already kind of under control, then sometimes I'll just figure out what is either the least funny or the least important plot-wise part of the strip and get rid of it. I wouldn't say it's any more of a limitation than working in any other format, other than, like, yes, there's less room, but it's just a different style of writing than writing a normal, the vertically oriented full-size comic page that we think of when we think of a comic. It's just a different kind of writing, and there's been several times where I managed to fit in like 9 or 10 panels into that space.
Right. Yeah. It just makes you more efficient, I think. When I've talked to other folks who are doing web comics and they have that sort of 4-panel limitation, you really have to be concise and precise in what you're trying to do.
It's also really important doing a webcomic to figure out how to make yourself go fast, because it's a self-imposed deadline, but it's still a deadline, and so you have to figure out what you're going to do to be able to get a page out every week or a few times a week or whatever the schedule that you've set and that you have your readers expecting from you. And so one of the goals I had when I was working on Hell Ink was to figure out how to come up with a process where I could color and letter much faster than I had been previously. And part of the strip format was to make that faster, because I just have less space to worry about.
Right.
And so once I got used to it, because generally speaking, at least for me, the pages I draw early in a series will take much longer than pages I draw later in the series, even if the later pages are more complicated, because I just haven't built up the muscle memory by getting the reps, drawing characters and drawing their environments and all that kind of stuff. It's still a bit more fresh, where later on it's well established. I'm not having to think as much when I do it. And so at this point, if I'm doing it all in a row, a Hell Ink strip takes about 5 hours. So I've gotten to the point where it's not even a full work day to do one of those, which I'm pretty happy with.
I noticed on your Twitter feed that you're involved in something called Drawn to Write. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that's all about.
Yeah, that is a program that I've been involved with for a few years now. It is a comics education program. And what we do is we run camps for kids and teens who want to learn how to draw comics. And we focus specifically on teaching them the skills that they need to draw comics, not just to learn to be a better illustrator. We actually, as of the day we're recording this, was the first day of our to be continued camp, which is the older group that we teach. So they're 13 to 18. And so, the kind of stuff we did today was focusing on, how do you make choices about what you need to put in a panel and what you need to show your reader? What moments from the story are important, to get across what you want to get across. Maybe you don't need this panel setting up. Like, we do an exercise involving a key and a door. So, maybe you don't need the panel setting up why the character has the key to open the door. Maybe in your story, the thing that matters is just seeing the door be opened. Or maybe you're telling a story where the key is the thing that matters. So we focus a lot more on that. And so, that's the kind of thing we're focusing on, is, how do you make a compelling comic page? And how do you go about making the decisions that will, tell your story as a sequential art narrative and not just as text with illustrations.
That sounds fascinating. I tell you, I wish I had that growing up, that's for sure. How are the kids liking it so far?
Oh, it's always great. It's so much easier. I used to be a real teacher, and I taught junior high social studies. This is so much easier because the kids who take this class want to be there, and they're excited to learn about it.
Yeah.
And this is our, I believe it's our 6th year running. We were able to, thanks to sort of advancements in COVID policy, we've been able to run in person this year at a smaller capacity than normal, with all the masks and
right.
a lot of hand washing, and we managed to find a space in the new location of Wonder Harbor Comics. Yeah, so we're using space provided by them, and we've been able to set up a really kind of a really effective space as far as pandemic safety is concerned. All the desks are 7 or 8 feet apart. Everyone's got masks on. Yeah, but it's nice that we've been able to run it in person again, because we've done some online stuff as well. But as an instructor, it's so much more satisfying being able to actually see what the kids are drawing and kind of watch them get it.
Yeah, that sounds cool. So we've talked about Hell Inc., we've talked about Guar. I wonder if you have any other projects in the works that you can talk about.
I'm working on a book right now that is, it's a historical kind of biography book for kids. That one I'm not super clear on how much I'm allowed to talk about, so I'm going to leave it at that. What I can talk about is that the 3rd Hell Inc. book is finished, and that is available right now on my Patreon. Anyone who signs up will have access to PDFs of all of the Hell Inc. books that are done so far, as well as about 1,000 pages of other comics that I have done and that some of my friends have done. And I am wrapping up the 4th book right now, so I'm hoping to get that out by the end of the year and then start working out the logistics of the Kickstarter campaign to get that into people's hands as a printed book.
Super. So where can people find out about you online and find out about all the work that you're doing?
Best place is hell.rentathugcomics.com. That's the main Hell Inc. website, and it's got links to all my other stuff from there. I'm also on Twitter at HeatComic, pretty active there. I've spent today mostly tweeting about basketball because I was watching the Raptors game when I got home. You can also go to Facebook. Jeff Martin Comics is the page there. I think that's kind of it. Oh, I guess if people use the Webtoon app, Hell Inc. is also on there.
Thanks to Jeff for the chat. You can discover more about Jeff on Twitter at Heat comic and online at hell.rentathugcomics.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts, and please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2020.